Look, obviously, the present conversation is as a result of the incident that started on the 7th of
Yeah,
October,
sure.
as you're saying,
Mm.
with the Hamas attack.
Mm.
From what I hear, actually, the Hamas was practicing some of the maneuvers in the openly,
Mm.
in Gaza, and Israel did receive the intelligence, but it would seem for some they thought, no, this is a kind of Trojan horse kind of thing.
Mm.
They want to distract us with this, whereas in
Yes.
fact this thing is going to come from elsewhere.
Mm.
And in fact, they've been concentrating more on the West Bank side rather than on the
Yes.
Gaza Strip.
Mm.
Okay, so and I'm told that the Prime Minister was not even informed.
Mm.
Netanyahu.
Mm.
Maybe they'd rated whatever it is. It looked like.
Mm.
And of course the border between Israel and Gaza is probably the most fortified in the whole world.
Yes.
And so they probably didn't have
Mm.
any fears of something really major coming in from that direction. But it looks like Hamas had done its homework,
Mm.
because it was a blitz.
Mm.
By the time Israel reacted, I think they had gone 25, 30 kilometers into Israeli territory.
Mm.
By the
Yes.
time Israel was able to start
Yeah.
working on it. I think the most shocking thing for people is which feeds the narrative of being a terrorist organization is the indiscriminate way in which
Yeah.
the Hamas attack was made,
Yeah.
and in particular the music festival. That was part of what the
Yes.
attack, and then the kidnapping of over 150 people, not just Israelis, including foreigners who were around,
Americans,
and
yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then saying, as Israel retaliates, they will start killing.
Mm.
Um, but before I go any further, one of the things, and I believe in this adage, it is often said that the first casualty of war is truth.
Yes.
So it's one has to be really, really careful in analyzing a war situation, because the first casualty is almost always the truth. So Israel then says, but Israel has made its intentions known from the very start. Or when the Prime Minister made his statement, what he said was, I'm paraphrasing, we are going to deal such a severe blow that it will not be forgotten in decades. And so the intention of Israel in this one seems to be not to defend themselves, but to obliterate Hamas. So I'm not, to that extent, I'm not surprised at the severity of the response, because I think Israel is in a state where they're saying they cannot afford the possibility of this happening again. Okay, now why did this happen now? So I was wondering, because it's like the greatest incursion in a long time. In fact, by the time Israel started getting on board, getting back, and trying to take territory back and driving Hamas back, I think over 1,000 people had been killed. But why? Now, one of the things that's been happening most recently was the normalization of relations between Israel and increasing number of Arab states, with Morocco, diplomatic relations. Now they're on the brink of getting to that point, or with what's this place that's called Dubai,
Emirates, yeah.
Now they're on the brink of getting to that point with Saudi Arabia, which is, if you like, the most significant country in the Muslim world, if you like, because of the two mosques that are there, and then economically and all of that, And so for some, the theory is Hamas wanted to as it were, to poke Israel so that Arab sympathy comes back to them as fellow Muslims, as it were, Because that's a legitimate question. Why, like, why? What is the time? What were they? What did they hope to achieve?
Objective, yeah.
Certainly, they didn't think they would free Palestine by doing that.
Of course.
You know, and it might be working. I don't know. And then this is a very complex thing when about Leicester. Remember, there is always lacking in the background Hezbollah in Iran
Yes.
and Iran, which is and Hezbollah is much bigger than Hamas. You know, and Iran also made clear. I think the Ayatollah at some point talked about destroying Israel. And we also know that on the Palestinian side, Hamas's point of view is they don't support a two-state solution as Hamas. So Israel's argument is the Palestinians are fighting for self-determination, fair and fine. We are fighting for existence, you know. But the question now becomes, which is where the analysis and the support comes in. You know, we know that Israel has been labeled an apartheid state.
Yes.
And perhaps it might be worthwhile to break it down, you know, how Palestinians relate to Israel. So you've got the territory that is called the Gaza, which is the so-called most densely populated space in the world, like a 25-kilometer strip, with over 2 million people.
Yeah.
In that small stretch of land, often it's been referred to as the world's largest open air prison or something like that. You know, that's the one territory. Then you've got Israel. Then you've got the West Bank with more Palestinians. Now, Hamas is in Gaza. The West Bank, you've got the Palestinian Authority having some sort of limited jurisdiction there. You know? Then you've got East Jerusalem, which is also Palestinian within the Israeli state, East Jerusalem. Then you've got Palestinians who live within the Israeli state. Some of them who are citizens.
Yeah.
You know. So it's this whole mixed bag. Because I'm saying this deliberately because often in people's minds, if they don't look at the map, they think, why don't you just slice it and say this piece is yours? You know, this is your side, all of that, you know. Then of course there's the argument of Israel he has violated the boundaries that were set in 1948. I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
They keep expanding.
That's why they were called the settlers, because they've actually moved into the space that had been given for the Palestinian people to actually now exist. So they continue to build on that particular piece of land.
And they keep doing that.
Yeah. So, and as a result, so the way, in terms of following the news also, is that you'll find that some of those settlers have kind of killed and removed some of the people from the Palestinian side, that is people from Gaza. So you are moving and pushing these people into Gaza, whereas they do have a right to be in the space, especially the West Bank. That's where some of them reside. And I think one of the things that happened now is that some of the people that are working in Israel, because they are coming from Gaza and they are being used as kind of cheap labor. So what is happening is that some of those, the employers basically, which are Israelis, have let those people go, and some of them are stuck in the West Bank now. They can't go to Gaza because Gaza is, you got soldiers all over that strip, so they can't move over. But I think before we go any further, that thing happened on Sunday, and then we had the response. What do you make of the response? Because one of the first countries to respond, as everyone knows, is the US and Britain, where they said Israel has the right to defend themselves, and they seem to not be, backing down, even though at this particular point, at the moment, things are not. They have intensified to an extent where now civilians, not just Hamas now, civilians are actually being put, talk to us about, and how is that then impacting the Palestine or the Arab world, as it were, looking at US and Britain.
So the US has been very clear, they're supporting Israel. Even they've even sent support. They've sent
they've
a couple
already
of
sent.
ships and that sort of thing. Again, this thing is complicated.
Yeah.
Really, John. So here's my take, though. Israel, like I said, made its intentions clear. We're going to obliterate Hamas now. And the humanitarian crisis is growing and it's going to grow because there's also the blockade. Because remember, even though Israel had a border and had moved from occupying the Gaza Strip, but basically they controlled everything, the electricity that goes in, the food, the water, and all of that. Now they've that blockade for any of those life-sustaining things to go into that territory, which is a problem. And those people apparently are not even in a position they can't leave either. In fact, they say they must evacuate.
Yeah, they said.
But where to?
Yes.
Because the
they said
bombardment
must evacuate to the south.
to the
from
south,
the north of Gaza
so
to the
because
south.
they're going to flatten and bombard the whole thing. But remember, the place is already the most densely populated space, even when the whole thing is occupied. So it's a dicey one. Here's okay. When I said here's my take, I was going to say one of the challenges of this war is that having a worthy cause often makes people assume that whatever action you take is legitimate because you've got a worthy cause.
Yeah,
and which is a wrong analysis. So, for example, we could say the raid by Hamas makes sense because look at the Palestinians and how they are under this cruel hand of, but does it then legitimize them going to this music festival and killing all of these people and all of that and kidnapping people and all of that? Or at the very least, would we expect Israel not to respond? But then when Israel responds, the same question arises. This level of force and where it's directed at, is it legitimate really in the circumstances? So what often happens is that people conflate just cause and just action. And in fact, what happens is that people already have got sides. So if they are pro-Palestinian, they will support whatever action is carried out in the name of the Palestinians. And I'm saying this deliberately because Hamas might not, in fact, does not represent all Palestinians.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? But because they took the action in the name of the Palestinians, it might be easy if your sympathies are already with Palestine to then say, So I think the superpowers fail us because they don't broker peace. They take sides.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure why they're so clear that they have to support Israel. I'm not so sure. Like what do they stand to gain in that sense?
Because it's their ally. I mean, that's what they would claim.
Yeah, but why is alliance with Israel so important to them?
Even to the cost of the the civilians, as it were, at this particular moment, because everyone now is in terms of what I'm hearing and seeing is that everyone is kind of complaining about the nature of the response, that the response is really disproportionate to what really had already happened.
Maybe I could weigh in on that.
Because, I mean, just before you go in, there's been now, I think the last report I had is about 2,300 and some odd Palestinians that have been killed, and more than 500 children of those that have been killed. And so you have this bombardment that is happening now consistently. Of course, you've got some players, and some of the justifications that people have been saying is that Hamas is using the human population as human shields. So then the question then is, does it still justify? I mean, you were speaking about the just cause and being mistaken at all costs, and going to say, look, we have to defend ourselves, and that's what is happening now currently, and people have nowhere else to go. The UN has been calling for the intervention, for the humanitarian intervention, so that people who are injured and all of those people, I mean, the hospitals, they're about to run out of fuel. So this whole thing now is has turned out way beyond than what it was in a minute. Of course, all of it in the name of Palestine, and that's what the initial, as Hamas was saying. So do we then conclude then and say Hamas then can we then say they are a terrorist organization, looking at their motive, if you like?
I don't know if we.
Or are they freedom fighters?
I'm thinking, yeah, because the official name is something resistance movement or something.
Yeah.
Like that,
Yeah.
Hamas. It's difficult to say because, like I said, it seems clear that Hamas does not represent the entire Palestinian population, but only the sort of extreme side of it, considering their refusal to accept a two-state solution. In fact, you go back in history, that's how you ended up having Hamas instead of Yasser Arafat's PLO.
Yes.
Because they actually reached an agreement at some point about the two
Yes.
states and shook hands, and they even got a Nobel Peace Prize for it,
Yeah.
if you remember.
Mm.
And then this guy said no. So Israel, this means these guys don't want us to exist, because if you actually say, no, this whole thing is supposed to be a Palestinian state, there is no two-state solution, you're actually denying Israel's right to
Yes.
exist,
Mm.
But I think part of the response by Israel now has got to do with almost them saying, how dare you? Because I think they really were at a point where their dominance over the Palestinian population was absolute and total.
Mm.
And so this particular raid almost kind of, I think, got them to a point of saying, how dare you? But if you look back in history, Israel has always reacted this way. In other words, excessively.
Yeah.
Mm.
You throw a rock at them, they will take a bazooka and
Retaliate.
yes.
Yeah.
If you shoot them with a tank, they'll bring in 3 planes and come and flatten your village. That's what they do. Now, that question has been asked, but why do they do this? I said, look, remember, initially this, even though we're talking about Israel and Palestinians, I'm saying that deliberately because we don't really have a country called Palestine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Palestinians, it was actually also an Israeli-Arab war. In other words, they are surrounded by
Arabs.
enemies,
Yeah.
and enemies for that matter.
Mm.
Lebanon,
Yes.
Syria,
Yeah.
Iran,
Mm.
all of these. So even this expansion tendencies is about creating buffer zones between them and the hostile neighbors,
Mm.
as it were. That's part of the argument that's made. That it's not simply about taking Palestinian territory, but we know that if we've got this land up to here and we are here, and on the other side of that there is Lebanon with the what's this terrorist organization from
Hezbollah.
Hezbollah, actually, Hezbollah, a bit like Russia and Ukraine saying, no, you can't have a NATO base here in Ukraine. Like they're too close,
Yeah.
You've become our enemy. So some of these expansionist tendencies are framed in that way. That look, we're not even just resisting. We are surrounded by enemies, all of whom do not want us to even exist, as it were. So we're going to do whatever we can for us to continue existing. Now, I know we've started with this incident, and I agree with you. We're not going to touch the religious issues.
Yeah.
But a bit of history does help, because one of the arguments is this Palestinian territory, or is it, in other words, Arab territory, if you like, or Muslim territory, as distinct from a Jewish territory? Now, some of the histories recorded even in the Bible, so of the Jewish people of being taken into slavery by the Egyptians and then being taken into slavery again by the Babylonians a bit later, and then eventually being scattered all over Europe, and you had the pogroms that killed hundreds of thousands of Jews in Russia and Eastern Europe, and then you had the
Genocide.
Holocaust, you got all these things. It's all part of their history.
Mm.
And then as far back as the 10 of the 19th century, you now had this idea of establishing a homeland for the Jews.
Mm.
By the way, they considered a number of places, including Uganda.
Huh?
Funny enough.
In Africa.
I haven't quite dug up why Uganda
Yeah.
was considered, but eventually said no, where Jerusalem is.
Yeah.
That's where our home is
Mm.
supposed to be.
But
So
why would they put them in Uganda?
I don't know. I haven't had a chance to look at it. It was funny enough. I can't remember the other place. There were a couple of other places that were considered. And people and Jews started buying land.
Mm.
Remember, Jews were now scattered in the diaspora. Which word diaspora initially had to do with Jews out there. And in all those places, there were all these anti-Semitic sentiments. They couldn't own property. That's how, by the way, they ended up in money and banking and so on, because they couldn't actually own immovable assets, sort
Yeah.
of thing. But then that then worked to their advantage. I know I'm simplifying something that's very complex. So they started buying land bit by bit in the territory. And one of the arguments, by the way, is to say, this land was just barren desert and marshes. We came and built it from
Fortified
scratch.
it. Mm.
And built it and developed from scratch. Israel is now the most technological advanced country in the Middle East, and militarily is getting very close to being the dominant power. Maybe Iran is still more powerful a little bit. I don't know. Certainly in terms of intelligence and so on.
Yeah.
Mm.
So they're like, no, we're not going to let anyone take it away from us. We built this thing.
Mm.
So, and then you had, of course, after the Second World War, the 1948 establishment of the State of Israel as we know it now. My point is, to say who owns what land sometimes depends on how far back in history you go,
Yeah.
Mm.
and then, of course, there is the element that is linked a bit to the religion, that in some ways, all these people are cousins,
Yeah.
Mm.
And therefore, in that sense, they all have a common stake in this land.
In this particular land, yeah.
Like we know now that Jerusalem is seen as a holy place for the three Abrahamic religions:
Yeah.
Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Mm.
For all of them, because my point is, I'm talking about the cousinhood,
Yes.
which is why they are called Abrahamic religions. They can be traced to a common ancestor. So that makes it very hard to extricate. So between the fact that there's a history to the occupation of this land that goes beyond the 1948 Accord, and number two, Israel finding itself being a relatively small state, because they are less than 10 million, surrounded by all these nations that have got hostile intentions towards them,
Yeah.
sometimes informs how they act.
And that's probably why we had the U.S. president being stand on the idea that let not anyone take advantage of Israel because of what is really happening, because there is I think it was in 1973 somewhere there when Egypt attacked Israel, and then there was also I think Syria also
The Six Day
attacked from
War
there.
and
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
So they've forever been trying
Attacked.
to repel people. All the
Yeah,
time,
yeah. But I think what for me is kind of strange. We speak of the intelligence. Egypt tipped them that something is going to happen,
That's true.
which is strange. I mean, Egypt was the one who tipped Israel. That relationship, I mean, for me, I didn't see that one coming.
Well, remember what I was saying, that this happened in a context where increasing number of Arab
Yeah.
nations were normalizing
Oh, okay. The relations
Yeah.
with
Israel.
Okay, so we know the UAE discussions that was
Yes.
happening, which has
Yeah.
now since been sort of put on hold by as a result of
No, the
what is
Saudi
happening.
Arabia one.
Saudi Arabia, yeah,
Mm.
as a result of what, and then you hear, because when you hear some of the people crying out there, the Palestinians, they are saying the Arab countries have let them down because they are not moving at this particular point in time. I mean, Iran was the only one who came out and said they support them, but there is no movement in terms of what US has done in terms of that. So what do you think is causing?
Yeah, you're right. Even Iran he has said it supports, but has not acted.
Yeah, it has not
moved.
acted. Yeah,
Has not
yeah.
moved.
What do you think causes that?
Look, I think it goes back to what I said earlier, that the timing of this seems to have been to reawaken outrage on the part of the Arab world,
Yeah.
because they knew how Israel would respond. So they to do enough to get Israel to
Respond.
do its
Okay.
usual thing,
Okay.
in the hope that then it will bring unity again.
Oh.
Because that's exactly what's happening in Israel.
Mm.
They are now forming like a government of national unity, the opposition and the current government,
Yeah.
to work together against this common enemy.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like maybe that was the hope on the other side, What I still don't understand is, what is the objective? Was it the objective to what? To destroy Israel? To what? To bring them to talks? I still don't get what the objective was
Of Hamas.
of the attack. Because surely they didn't think they were going to overrun Israel
Of
until
course
they,
not.
Yeah.
or at least they thought, no, man, for whatever it's worth, we must get something, because these guys for too long have been under
Oppressing
their
us.
thumb. So indeed, it's a miserable existence for Palestinians. Even the ones that are citizens
Yeah.
do not have the same extent of rights as other Israeli citizens.
Wow. So hence the apartheid state existence.
I think if you look at the criteria for apartheid, I think there are 3 criteria, and you do an analysis, you could get to that point. I think the only thing, in my view, that makes people hesitate is that is all the things we've said about the position of Israel in where it is now and what it is facing.
This is KNR Radio according to you.
Hey,
One more,
guys.
please be listening. We decide to play.
Sorry,
jingle.
sorry. Guys, you're listening to KNR. Yeah,
Oh
that
my
jingle.
gosh.
I don't know where it came from. But yeah, also let me
Oh
just
my
read through
goodness.
quickly in this moment. There's been some reaction here.
Okay.
Some people talking about that the traders, all of the weapons, we don't know whether the deal behind this discussion, maybe that was happening in the UAE,
Okay.
and the contracts, that were actually now what Hamas was against, the fact that maybe what you were talking about, the relations,
normalization of relations.
yeah. And then someone says, Mo and Denkasao is saying, look, well, what is clear is that the idea of Israel as a country with a strong military and intelligence has been shattered. That's been a big question that's been asked. How did these guys get to this particular mission without Israel knowing?
But it's a single incident.
Mm.
It might not be enough for us to say that's
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
they're
but
off. And you never know with intelligence.
Mm.
You know how it is that these people can say, okay, we must let them because it will give us an opportunity and an
Yeah, to
excuse
rechallenge.
Yeah.
to do what we
Mm.
wanted to do all along. You can't know.
yeah.
So a single incident might not be enough to reach a conclusion that therefore their intelligence and military
Hasn't been efficient.
hasn't been efficient, because you just can't
So you're
know.
saying that the counterintelligence to that could have been to say, let them come,
So
and
that we
then
can-
so that we've got a good excuse to deal with them once and
Because
for
it
all.
just doesn't
Yeah.
make
which
sense,
looks
honestly.
like what they're trying to do
Mm.
now.
Yeah.
Which is now we'll have a chance to go into Gaza, which they now desisted from.
Yeah.
They basically satisfied with themselves with having an iron curtain,
yeah.
and that sort of thing. Now they've got an excuse to go in there. We just don't know.
Yeah. And I think one last question from my
Mm.
side, Hector, as we're about to maybe close this, is the UN and all the. I mean, we've seen. By the way, there's been support for Palestinian people
Yes.
all over.
Yes.
We've seen in Cape Town,
Even
in
the
the
president
US.
has.
even
Yeah.
South Africa's
Yeah.
stance is very
Mm.
clear.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
standing with the
So
Palestinians.
all over the world, I mean, even some of the, I saw in Britain some of the sort of matches that was there. There were some of the Jewish people that were actually joining the Palestinian people
Mm.
because of the force and the kind of rage with
Mm.
which Israel is responding to the matter. So all of that then takes us to a point where the UN voice seems to not matter in this particular, the impunity that we are seeing. I mean, what does that say about the UN itself?
I am actually surprised that there hasn't been, as far as I know, an emergency
meeting.
Security Council meeting.
Mm.
Because this war has potential ramifications for everyone actually.
Mm.
In the final analysis. And by the way, just to comment on what you mentioned a moment ago, I deliberately talked about Hamas and the Palestinian people. Not everybody who supports the Palestinian people supports Hamas,
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
the organization, although it acts in the name of the Palestinian cause. But you've got all millions of Palestinians who are not necessarily part of Hamas. And I don't think there could be anyone who doesn't have sympathy for the Palestinians and what they're going through and how they've lived their lives for decades. I mean, there are generations that have been born and they've not known of any other life other than this life of occupation.
Yeah.
And Israeli dominance. So, and self-determination is a very, very important fundamental right. It's essential to being human, the self-determination. But that weighed with Israel's continued argument that for us, it's not even self-determination, it's existence. They don't want us to exist, and we can't be scattered into diaspora again. We've worked too hard to be where we are now, but the excesses are just, it's just horrific. By the way, both sides commit atrocities that are horrendous because, for instance, Hamas also posted videos of some of the horrible things that happened during the raid. During the raid, and then we also know what's been happening with the bombardment of Israel. But Israel has always been extreme. When I was looking this up, I found that there's a Palestinian village that has got a history that has been flattened by Israel at least 108 times.
Sure.
So there's a history of it being they build raised to the ground. It's extreme. It is. But what does it mean for geopolitics? What does it mean because the economy of that region in some ways will affect all of us. So I was hoping that the world powers would try to be more neutral and work towards a cessation of hostilities rather than nailing their whatever to the mast and saying, we are standing with Israel. We are standing with this guys, And now they can't be brokers of peace because they've taken sides. But which leaves the UN, as you said.
But Blinken has been discussing with the is it UAE? Is it UAE?
Saudi Arabia.
UAE. I think there is one of the countries who was asking for them to speak to Egypt to open up a corridor so that people can run to Egypt.
Yes.
I mean, imagine that.
Because Egypt is closed on
he closed on
and
its
they can't
end.
go into Israel, so they are stuck there in that narrow strip in Gaza.
So it's kind of strange. They are speaking to another country to speak to another country. so that people can have access.
but
but-
it's understandable. It's like Khathethe naye mani itshomi yakho.
Kahle kahle, yeah.
But if wena uzakumamela wena,
Yeah.
that
But
kind of thing.
what would it take, though, for this issue between Israel and the Palestinians to get to a point whereby they see eye to eye? There's
I think they
There's
have to get back to a two-state solution. I don't see how they
Mm.
can do it without a two-state solution.
Mm,
Because I don't think they can also have a single state where all have equal rights. They're too
Mm.
polarized,
yeah.
you know, and then they just become a
and
single
also
nation.
this adds,
Mm.
I mean, what this happening now, it actually adds to that type of, because for me, you are raising now, there's a generation now of Palestinians
Mm.
that actually their hate for Israelites is actually being, what's the word, being enhanced at the moment. The same for the Israelites
Mm.
because of what has happened within this week. So what you will have a generation that even if they at the moment they are not supporters of Hamas,
Mm.
but you might have a generation whose mother or whose cousins were killed in this. I mean, some families have lost some people have lost entire families.
Mm.
So for them to actually live through this now and then expect them to live as
harmony, it's
yeah,
not gonna
it's
happen.
not gonna
Because
happen.
it looks like those are the only two solutions.
Mm.
Either this whole thing becomes a single state with all citizens having equal rights
Mm.
and proper democratic. You've got Arabs living alongside Jews, which they've been doing, by the way,
Yeah.
for ages. But I think the hostilities are just too much, and perhaps they have to go
Mm.
back to a two-state solution. But even that one, the problem is who gets which portion.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because didn't Israel also cut power supply to?
Yeah, they did
Yeah.
in this instance.
Because you've got the fertile part, which is
Mm.
nearer the water, and then you've got the other
the
part.
fuel, they cut
Yeah,
fuel,
so-
they cut
Mm.
water, they cut, what was the third one? Electricity.
Electricity.
Electricity,
Yeah,
yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
really under
Oh,
siege.
no,
Yeah,
it's
Gaza is
it's
under
sad.
siege.
I think, guys, we are about to close this discussion, but we stand personally. I really stand with the people of Palestine. I understand, maybe Israel's need for them to respond, but I mean, in the manner in which they are responding is really it goes beyond any point where one can feel compelled to support their cause.
The humanitarian crisis.
Yeah,
Mm.
no, it's really, I mean, when you see children who being bombarded, rushed to hospitals, which some people are actually sleeping in hospitals and all of that. So for me, I think from the human point of view, yes, Hamas, what they did was terrible. What they
Uncalled
did.
Oh, by the way, they also did all these things we're talking
Yeah,
about. The
yeah.
ones we're saying Israel is doing.
Yes.
yeah, no, they
Mm.
I mean, they did
They're
it
acting
last
the
week.
same
Children and
way.
everything.
Yeah.
They're acting the same way. Yeah.
That's why that song "Two Wrongs Don't Make No
Yeah,
Right."
right,
So,
yes.
it really don't. I wanted to play that song,
It's
by
a
the way,
mess.
before we start this discussion. Two wrongs don't make no right.
But
But yeah. So, guys, we keep praying though for the people of Palestine, and and we stand with them, and we also pray for the innocent civilians of Israel who also have lost people in this whole
Yeah.
debacle. So yeah, we are.
And I'm particularly worried about the kidnapped people.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
That's like
Mm.
especially cruel position to be in.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're now being used as these bargaining chips.
Mm.
Your life depends on how these ones act, and
Mm.
these ones. Yeah, it's
And depending which country they have a relationship with, are they going to act
Yeah.
swiftly? I mean,
yeah.
you don't know if you're going to be killed.
By the way,
or-
South Africa is making arrangements to evacuate South Africans from the territory.
Yeah.
Ah,
So yeah.
yeah, it's a sad state of affairs. And
Okay.
the UN, where are you, UN?
UN is, I think they've made, for me, I must say they've been making the right calls. Russia, we know Russia also had said there must be a cessation of
Yes.
hostilities, ceasefire. China
But we
also
need
called.
UN itself.
Yeah, I
Yes,
know.
that's
UN
what I
has-
mean.
Not just the individual countries.
Yeah.
No, UN has actually been making that call, but
Okay.
now
Mm.
in the background where you have the US and the Britain, and also surprisingly the Union, also European Union, has been standing against this particular it's actually saying Israel must withhold its its response in the manner in which it's doing at the moment. I mean, they called it upset, even America, to say 1.1 million people to be moved in 24 hours.
How is
I
that
mean,
possible?
How do you do that?
How do you do that?
You can't.
So we really
Yeah.
but guys, we're going to close the show now. The
Yes.
time is 4:49, and we want to close it with a great song. I've been looking forward to playing to this song, guys. Millie Jackson.
You love the song. Don't act as if you don't like
Yeah,
it.
I love it. That's the song we're closing the show with.
Okay.
Thank you guys for
Yeah.
watching there on YouTube and Facebook. We're gonna close now because we can't play music whilst you guys are watching. Facebook is
Yes.
gonna have issues with
Silence
us.
us.
Yeah. So thank you for watching there, and have yourselves a nice evening. I'm going now to this song, guys. Say your bye-byes, because that song is 9 minutes,
Okay.
and I want to play all 9 minutes of it.
After you